Next week is your pickup week for anything that you left at school or anything that was in Miss Navert or my classroom. So Miss Navert sent the email out to your parents and to you guys this morning. So go look over that. You can pick up any day next week. It just has to be in a certain time frame, and you have to go behind the school, okay? The other is do not bring your computers with you, because I think things have been going around saying like bring them, don't. If you have a school computer, there's a different time for drop off. So don't bring your school computer because we still have school through the end of next week, okay? But that means that next week, next Friday is kind of like our official last day of school. So you'll have assignments all the way through, and me and Ms. Navert are gonna talk about like being able to kind of get together, like all together at least one more time. So kind of look out for that, because we want to kind of gather everybody together at least one more time before the end of the school year, okay? All right, so the other thing was that Mr. Angel has the recommendation forms for jobs and things. He said he's going to contact people at the end of the month or beginning of June to let everybody know what decisions were made about that, okay? So if you applied, then we got your application and Ms. Navert submitted the form, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and kind of move into what we were going to do today with our geometry. So last week we left off, let me find my right screen. We left off talking about our different types of lines. Let me share this one. So in your Khan Academy this week, you were starting to talk about parallel lines, okay? So parallel and perpendicular lines. So parallel lines are lines that essentially never touch. They're never gonna touch because they continue on. One of the ways that you can kind of see that and kind of helps you remember it is because in the word parallel, you have parallel lines because you have the double L. So that helps you kind of remember a little bit of the difference of parallel and perpendicular because you have the double L's in the word, right? So when we talk about parallel, it's things like the edges of sidewalks, it would be train tracks, things like that, that they're never gonna touch, because if they do, that would be a problem. And when we talk about different shapes that have parallel lines, things like squares, you've got one like your left side and your right side, or your top and bottom, they're not going to touch. So that makes them parallel because they don't intersect, right? But then we move over to perpendicular lines. So perpendicular lines are two lines that touch or intersect to create a 90-degree angle. It has to be exactly 90 degrees. Otherwise, it's just an intersection. So if I have this line here and this line here, that's not parallel. Sorry, that's not perpendicular or parallel. That one is just an intersecting, okay? So if it is that, then you have to, it's just an intersection. If it is perpendicular, it has to have the 90-degree angles, okay? So if it doesn't create 90-degree angles, not perpendicular, right? So when we talk about shapes that have it, shapes that like triangles that have right angles, or squares or rectangles, those have perpendicular lines. Even though they don't continue on like this, it is simply a shape that has perpendicular lines, so that would be perpendicular, even though it doesn't go in either direction, okay? All right, let me stop sharing that real quick. All right, any questions about that? Because those are pretty straightforward. Those are kind of like, those are some of the geometry things that are kind of like pretty straightforward. It is or it isn't, if it's parallel or perpendicular. Okay, let me share the other screen. All right, so the quadrilaterals are the ones that are a little bit more tricky. That's why I wanted to kind of go over them and see if there was any questions about it. Because there are certain ones that they fall inside of multiple categories. So let me get my screen up and I'll share that with you guys. Whoops, this one. So I'm gonna send you guys this graphic so that you guys will have it as a reference. And honestly, it's something, if you wanted to print it out and put it in a notebook for 5th grade, it would be a good one, okay? We start with trapezoid. So we call this the quadrilateral club because a quadrilateral is any shape that has 4 sides, any shape at all that has 4 straight sides. But then we start to look at what makes it a specific kind of quadrilateral. So we've got a trapezoid, and we can see the trapezoid, it has 1 pair of parallel sides. That's it, okay? So it says the rule is that it must have exactly one pair of parallel sides. If it has two pairs of parallel sides, it falls somewhere in here, okay? Because if we notice, the difference between a trapezoid and all the rest of them is that the trapezoid has the top and bottom are parallel, and that's it. Or we could turn it, and it could be a different way, as long as there's only one pair of parallel sides. All of the rest of these have two, right? Then we go into the parallelogram, okay? So a parallelogram, it's what has two pairs of parallel sides. So any quadrilateral that has two pairs of parallel sides is a parallelogram. And that's why all the rest of these are inside of it. Because if we look, a rhombus, a rectangle, and a square all fit this. They have two pairs of parallel sides, right? Then we can look at this is always a discussion that's kind of had about the rhombus and the rectangle, is what makes it a rhombus, what makes it a rectangle, and is it a square, right? So if we look at the rectangle, we've talked about this before and kind of had this discussion in class, that it has to have 4 right angles. That's the requirement for a rectangle. 4 right angles, 2 pairs of parallel sides, right? If it has 4 right angles, it automatically has the parallel sides, right? Then we talk about a rhombus. So a rhombus doesn't have to have any right angles, but it might, right? The requirement for a rhombus is that it has to have congruent sides, meaning equal. So congruent means equal, all right? If it is congruent or equal, that means that this side, this side, this side, and this side all match, all right? When we think about that, we're usually thinking, oh, 4 equal sides, that's a square. But if there's no right angles, it's not a square. So that's why this is a big thing, because if it's a rhombus, it has 4 equal sides, but no right angles, it's not a square. If we have a rectangle, it has 4 right angles, but the sides aren't equal, it's not a square. If you have both of these, that's when it's a square. And that's why we've talked about in class, a rectangle might not be a square, but a square is always a rectangle. And we can say the same thing about a rhombus. A rhombus might not be a square, but a square is always a rhombus. That's why the square is kind of inside of everything, because a square is a rhombus, and a square is a rectangle, and a square is a parallelogram. Just like a rhombus is also a parallelogram, and a rectangle is also a parallelogram. And all of them are all quadrilaterals. Make sense? Okay. Let me get out of this because I see that we've got some questions. So let me stop that sharing. All right. All right. So when we talk about that, like I said, quadrilaterals, it just kind of comes down to like practice and memorizing it. So as you go through, it's going to be, you know, it just takes time to kind of get used to what they are. Okay. But that's where practice with anything, like in math, you're not solving a problem, but you're looking at images and you're looking at things in the real world, and you're looking at things on a worksheet, or you're looking at things on the internet, and you start to kind of recognize, oh wait, that's not a rhombus because it doesn't have 4 equal sides, or that's not a rectangle because it doesn't have right angles, things like that. It just kind of takes time and practice, right? All right. And I'm also noticing that we need to stop using the chat because it's not for what we're using it for, apparently, right? Okay, so are there any questions about any of that? Anything to do with the Khan Academy lessons you've been working on, or your iReady? Oh, Gabby, I see your hand. Go ahead.
I have a question for Khan Academy.
Okay.
When we have to do the parallel lines and the perpendicular lines, I kind of get a little confused on it because they show these questions that look like perpendicular lines, but then as you look at it, it's not if you click the answer.
So let's see. Let me see if I can go into it. Give me 1 second because I'll go into some of the questions.
Okay.
Because then that might help if we can actually look at some of the practice questions. There we go. Oops. Yep. So you're saying that it looks like it's parallel or perpendicular, but then it's not? Like it says it's not? The main thing is going to be if it actually identifies it. So let me share this screen. Oops. Oops, where is it? Khan Academy. There we go. So if we look at like this question here, okay? it says which of these figures shows parallel lines. So that one we know is going to be this one right here, right? We know that's going to be C. When we're looking at perpendicular, we want to look at like these. If it doesn't create, if it intersects, like they touch, that's just intersecting lines. If it has that square in there as to show its 90-degree angle, then it would be perpendicular. Same as the one with the Swedish flag, right? So this would be like a real world example. This one is definitely going to be, it says which statement about the 2 yellow stripes in the Swedish flag is correct. That's when we have to look and say, okay, the 2 stripes are parallel to each other. They're touching, so we know they're not parallel, right? Then it says the 2 yellow stripes in the flag are perpendicular to each other. That's when we question, is it creating a 90-degree angle, or is it just 2 lines that are touching? And that's why I said it just kind of comes to, if it's just touching. So if they're just touching, like the other question we were looking at, like this. So if we look at B here, that's intersecting. So they're touching, they're intersecting, they cross each other, but they're not perpendicular because they don't create that 90-degree angle there. And that's going to be the big difference, is if they create a 90-degree angle, like in this one here, or on the Swedish flag, or if we go to one of the other questions, if we look at the road map here, these are not quite a 90-degree angle here, but then over here, if we look at Dove Street and Robin Street, that creates that 90-degree angle. It creates a square corner. So that would be where your 90-degree angle would be. Over here, we can see that it's slightly smaller, so that would make it an acute angle.
Okay, I get it now.
And like I said, it just takes practice. It really is just like practice and looking at it and kind of comparing things. This map image is a really good one because you can see some that are perpendicular and others that aren't. And they're very close to each other. So it kind of gives you good practice in comparing things like that too.
Okay, I get it now.
Yep. All right, other questions? Any other questions? Whether it's about Khan Academy or if it's anything that I went over just a minute ago. Because again, I don't want to overload you because a lot of it has to do with vocabulary and looking at images. So that's why I decided I'm not going to talk about triangles today, because quadrilaterals is enough. And I know you guys are practicing with that in your Khan Academy. So we'll probably do a quick meeting, next week, or we'll do it as part of one of our meetings next week to kind of go over the triangles just to make sure we're clear on those too. Okay. Question, Beckham?
Saying I just joined.
Oh, okay. I thought you were waving because you had a question. All right. Okay. So like I said, it was just kind of a quick, short meeting today because I didn't want to overload you. Plus, I know we're kind of getting to that end point where we're all just kind of getting a little bit of restless. So I'm not gonna like overload you guys and go over too much today. All right. Parker, question. Go ahead.
Is there a Zoom meeting tomorrow?
Not tomorrow. Because I didn't see anything in Miss Navrit's emails about it or on the weekly checklist. So there won't be one tomorrow.
Okay.
Right. And then, like I said, Miss Navrit and I will send out when we send out our checklist, and we're going to decide when we want to meet next week, because next week's going to be kind of our last week of school. So we'll figure out when we can all meet together. So it's both of us plus everybody who joins. All right. If you don't have any specific questions for me, you are free to go. Okay, let me go ahead and unmute everybody so you can talk. But otherwise, you are free to go. And if you have a question for me, stay behind, and I can answer your individual questions. Okay.
With work. Smith,
my dog is like Baby Yoda, but brown.
Dr. Smith, so I'm done. So I'm done with all my work.
Awesome.
Parker.
Good.
Saying anything.
Guys.
Hi.
Wait, where's
Bye.
Parker.
Hey, I was Devin. Please tell me Devin TL. Aw.
No, Devin didn't join us today.
Oh.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye, Mr. Smith.
See ya.
Everyone.
I'm sorry for joining late today.
That's okay. Like I always do, I recorded it. So as soon as it downloads to my computer, I'm going to send that link out. So you can always go back and go over it. But since I have you here, Beckham, I'll do a quick rundown of what we talked about. So let me go ahead and stop the recording so it doesn't